Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Alfred Hitchcock Presents review. Today it is Season 1, Episode 8, Our Cook's a Treasure, starring Everett Sloane as Ralph Montgomery, Janet Ward as Ethel Montgomery, and Beulah Bondi as Mrs. Sutton. And this is an entertaining and very solid episode of the show. There's one thing that I have a little bit of an issue with that I think could have made this a great episode. I will address that as I go along with the review, but I do feel that overall this is an excellent episode worth watching. So we start with our main character Ralph, and we learn his wife's not feeling that well, and he's talking to one of our other main characters, the cook and housekeeper, Mrs. Sutton, and they're chatting about different things, the newspaper, dinner, things like that, and then Ralph's wife Ethel comes down. And the only other significant thing we really learn here in this scene is that she is in some type of play, and there is a man that's in charge of it that she will be working with. This will be significant near the end of the episode. So we go to the next scene, and Ralph goes outside, and he's talking to a man named Earl, and they're talking about the news, and we learn that there's a woman named Mrs. Andrews, and she's a housekeeper, and she's been poisoning people, and she's still at large. She has not been found. This will also be significant. Then we go to another scene with Ralph at work, and he starts not to feel very well. He says he must just have some indigestion, but then he has to sit as his secretary has to help him. Then he says he must just have cramps. He doesn't need a doctor, and he'll be okay, but we're not really sure as an audience at this point, as it seems like it could be something worse. This scene was done pretty well. Then we go home, and Ralph is resting, and his wife comes over and says she's very concerned about him, and Ralph says he's okay. She says she should stay home, but he tells her, no, you should go to your rehearsal or practice or whatever it is. I'm not really too sure on that. So we go to later in the day, and Ralph is in his workshop, and he finds some kind of weed killer or spray or something, and it says that it has arsenic in it, which would be significant. He asks his wife about it on her way out, and she says she didn't buy it. So he kind of just dismisses it, but it stays in the back of his mind, as we will soon see. So we go to the next scene in the episode, and Ralph is still a little shaky. He says maybe dinner didn't totally agree with him. And Ralph and Ethel chat about Mrs. Sutton. Ralph seems unsure about her. He says maybe we should let her go, but Ethel kind of backs her up and says it's hard to find a good housekeeper. And after this conversation, we do see Mrs. Sutton, who we haven't seen since the beginning of the episode, and she has kind of an odd and suspicious look on her face, which is a good mislead, as we'll find out. And this is my issue with the episode. I know that they're trying to keep up the mystery about Mrs. Sutton, but she was an entertaining character, and I felt that we needed a few more scenes with her to completely make the episode work even better than it does. But I'll get to more of that at the end of the episode. So then we go, and Ralph is playing cards with his friends, and they're talking about the housekeeper still being at large, and we also find out that there was a picture of her in a paper from back quite a few years ago, and at this point we can see that Ralph is really suspecting Mrs. Sutton of maybe trying to poison him and his wife. So Ralph is now at home, and he says he's going to have some cocoa, and he takes a very small sip, and he pours it into a jar because he would the next day get it examined by a man who tells him no arsenic shows up in the cocoa, but if you give me some more time, I can do a full analysis. And he also says it might not show up if it's a small dose, so this concerns Ralph even more, who's now back at work, and he looks at the old newspaper with the woman's picture in it, and we as an audience are not shown the full picture, which I thought was well done, so we're not really sure if it's Mrs. Sutton or not at this point. But Ralph is not sure because we find out this picture's like 15 years old, and he says, if you add 15 years and about maybe, some extra weight to it, it could be her. Who knows? That seems a little unbelievable to me. Wouldn't she look kind of the same? I don't know. I guess I'll just go with it. I guess it's needed in the context of the episode. So then Ralph gets a call. He learns that there was a small dose of arsenic in the cocoa, and the man says it wouldn't kill you once, but if you took it for about a week straight, it probably would kill you. So now Ralph is freaked. He calls his wife to see if she's okay. Mrs. Sutton answers and says that the wife is not in, so Ralph freaks out and runs immediately home. But it turns out his wife is there. At this point, he figures Mrs. Sutton's been lying and playing some kind of game, so he tells her to leave. He tells her she's dismissed. Mrs. Sutton's not happy about it, but she says she won't stay where she's not wanted, and eventually she agrees to leave. So Ralph tells his wife, I fired her. And his wife doesn't seem too happy about this. She says good help is hard to find. And basically then Ralph goes outside and sees a paper that the woman that has been doing all this has been captured. So now Ralph realizes he was wrong. It was not Mrs. Sutton. So he apologizes to her and he pays her for the work she's done so far, I'm assuming. And Mrs. Sutton says, I'm going to leave because I don't really like lying anyway. Your wife had me tell some lies for her. And her and that man she's in the play with, we find out are probably involved. It's very strongly inferred. And then Ralph's wife, Ethel, offers him a nice cup of cocoa. So I think we can figure out at this point that it is Ethel who is trying to get rid of Ralph so she can be with the other man that she wants to be with. So an excellent twist. Like I said, I feel if they would have built up Mrs. Sutton as a little more of a threat instead of keeping her so mysterious, it may have worked even better, but I guess it's just a personal preference. The episode is entertaining on its own, and I give Our Cook's a Treasure 3.5 out of 5. Definitely an episode worth watching at least once, so 3.5 out of 5 for Our Cook's a Treasure. And as always, thank you very much for watching.